I thought we were buying quiet, porch-light evenings, kids zipping by on scooters, the kind of block where people wave with the hand that isn't holding a coffee. That's what it looked like when we rolled our rattly rental truck down Alder Lane in Maple Hollow, North Carolina. Sun catching on mailboxes, a lemonade stand with construction paper labels, wind whispering through big maples. My wife squeezed my knee and said, almost to herself, "We needed this." And for the first time in months I believed her. We'd been doing long-distance nerves, her on-call at odd hours, me trying to sleep through the sound of big city traffic. We wanted ordinary. We wanted neighbors whose biggest complaint was crabgrass. I was halfway off the ramp with a box that felt like it was filled with bowling balls when I heard it. Heels hitting concrete in a rhythm that sounded like an audit. I turn, and there she is, a woman striding toward us with a posture like a measuring stick, a binder clamped to her chest so tight it squeaked. Sunglasses that said, "I never blink." She looked at the moving truck like it had personally insulted her ancestors. "You're obstructing pedestrian access," she announced. "No hello, no welcome, just a ticket machine with lipstick. Alder Lane sidewalk is a multi-use path. That truck needs to move immediately." I set the box down and smiled the way you smile at a barking dog, gentle, non-threatening, hoping it helps. "We'll shift it as soon as we empty a couple rows. We'll be quick, promise." She didn't nod or soften. She flicked her eyes over the truck, then over us, and said, "I'm Beverly Crane. I chair the Neighborhood Standards Council." She said it like judge and jury. "Here's a starter packet. Codes. Schedules. We have a high bar here." She handed me 15 pages of rules, trash can timing, acceptable mailbox fonts, a list of approved garden gnomes like that was a thing. Then she pivoted, binder thumping against her hip, and marched off. My wife watched her go, one eyebrow up. "She seems delightful," she murmured. I exhaled and told myself it was just a bad first impression. People have their quirks. Give it a week. Day 2 we woke up to a neon pink flyer taped to our railing. Neighborhood Oversight Council at the top with a clip art emblem, talking about grass height, patio umbrellas, and social disturbances after 9 p.m. It was printed at home and trying very hard to look official. My wife held it at arm's length like a weird bug. "Who builds a fake government in their living room?" she said, and we laughed, but it didn't quite reach our eyes. I met Marcus Lee walking his beagle after lunch. He stopped when he saw the flyer in my hand and winced. "Yeah, Beverly's been running this block like it's her personal HOA for 3 years, he said, voice low, like he didn't want the bushes to overhear. "People pay fines, I guess. She calls them contributions. Sometimes it's easier to hand over $50 than fight." "Is any of it real?" I asked. He scratched his cheek, eyes flicking toward a dark sedan parked 2 doors down. "She hired a guy, security sort of. Makes himself visible, you know? The message is, you don't want trouble." I looked at the sedan. Tinted windows on a street where nobody else had tinted windows. "What's his deal?" "No one knows his last name," Marcus said. "Calls himself Officer Riker. That's not his title. He just says it like one." He forced a smile. "Welcome to Maple Hollow." We decided to ignore the weird and make a night of it. Laid out a cheap string of globe lights in the backyard. Hauled the little Weber out of the garage. Invited 4 friends from out of town. Burgers and stories and a playlist that sounded like the better parts of college. For an hour I forgot the binder and the flyer and the sedan. Then there was a crack from near the fence, like a twig breaking in a hand, not under a foot, and the kind of silence that follows when everybody holds their breath at once. I crossed the grass with a flashlight and found fresh half-moons pressed into the damp at the fence line. Not paw prints. Boots. My wife's voice behind me went quiet and flat the way it gets when she's working. "Someone was here," she said, not a question. We found a zip tie clipped at one end and a little stub of neon tape stuck to a branch. It wasn't a crime scene, but it wasn't nothing. Next morning there was a note pinned to the gate. Unapproved social event. Noise complaints recorded. Fines assessed if repeated. No letterhead beyond the fake little emblem. No signature. No contact info. I laughed, held it up to the sunlight like maybe a watermark would make it less ridiculous. My wife didn't laugh. She slipped the note into a folder she'd started and said, "They're testing boundaries." At 10 on the dot, that dark sedan rolled down to the curb in front of our house and idled like an idea. A big guy stepped out in a uniform that looked like a discount Halloween cop costume. Shiny fabric, no agency markings. He had a metal badge that could have come from a gift shop and a clipboard with a piece of graph paper on it. He did slow laps up the sidewalk, peered at tires like he was checking for what? Illegal rubber? My wife slid her phone out and shot video through the blinds. We are both careful people, but she is careful for a living. Angles, timestamps, noting things like the lack of a visible name tag. Zoom, she murmured, and I did. His badge had an eagle, the word officer, and literally nothing else. We watched him pause at Marcus's house and scribble something. The beagle barked from inside. The big guy moved on. I felt my jaw tighten. He's playing cop, I said. Pretending to be one is a crime, she said without looking away from her screen. I'd be curious how far he's willing to take the act. That answer came quicker than I wanted. 2 days later, just after noon, there was a knock that rattled the wood and a shadow that filled the glass. I opened the door and found him on our porch, chin up, hand heavy on his belt. We've received a report of surveillance, he said, pronouncing each syllable like a spell. You can't record security operations. Security operations, I repeated, and there must have been something in my voice because he shifted his weight, annoyed. He went into a rehearsed speech about community safety and compliance, and I almost missed it, the shiny black grip at his hip. Weapon, not holstered like a cop, not level like a range instructor. Slung low, sloppy. My wife stepped into the frame at my shoulder, and her entire body language changed, calm but coiled, the way a runner looks at a starting gun. Are you licensed to carry in this state? She asked, tone conversational and razor thin. And before you answer, remember this is being recorded. His eyes flicked down to the phone, then to me, then back to her. I don't have to answer to you, he said. I'm contracted. By who? She asked. Neighborhood standards, he said, like it was a division of the Department of Justice. Right then, like the universe loves comedic timing, Beverly came clip-clopping up our walk, binder in hand, smile ambitious and wobbling. Everything okay here? She asked too brightly. Perfect, my wife said, still looking at the man's hip. Miss Crane, is your contractor licensed and insured to provide armed security services in North Carolina? Beverly's mouth opened and nothing came out. She looked at him. He looked at her. Whatever script they'd planned didn't cover this scene. He's authorized, she tried. By who? My wife asked again, softer, and that softness made it worse somehow. You people, Beverly said, and now the veneer cracked, are making things difficult. We're trying to keep standards. You're trying to keep control, I said before I could stop myself. She did a tiny flinch, and then the man puffed up his chest like a frog and said, back off. He swung a little to square himself, and his hand brushed the gun. That was when my wife stepped forward so fast he blinked. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. She said, in a voice I've only heard twice in our marriage, remove your hand from the weapon and step off my property. She slid a card from her back pocket that I'd forgotten was there, because we are off duty at home. We are new in town. We are trying to start over. The card with the seal and the tiny print that begins Special Agent. He read it, and all the swagger fell away at once. You can't, he started. I can, she said. And I will. Beverly tried to recover with a huff and an appeal to community spirit that sounded like a press release written by a robot. It didn't work. The not-a-cop backed down the steps without turning his back and then beeline to his car. Beverly retreated with him, binder clutched so tight I worried it would fuse to her shirt. They didn't go far, just 2 houses down, whispered and gestured and scrambled like stagehands who'd dropped a backdrop. We thought maybe that would be the end of it. Sunlight disinfects, right? But there is a thing that happens when someone who has been getting their way for years feels the floor underneath them shift. They don't sit down and breathe. They double down. Beverly posted a glossy flyer the next morning. Emergency community meeting, security and neighborhood preservation. Preservation was a nice euphemism for do what I say. My wife and I spent the day putting our own binder together. Videos, stills, screenshots, a printout of public records my wife pulled where any legitimate HOA filings should have been and weren't. There was no registered HOA for our subdivision, not for a decade. There had been a council, once, a voluntary thing, dissolved when so-and-so moved away and nobody wanted the job. Beverly had resurrected the shell and turned it into a throne. The community center was packed that night, metal chairs, nervous chatter, the smell of old coffee and lemon cleaner. Beverly stood up front with her binder, two loyalists flanking her like bookends, and opened with a speech about crime waves, lawn decay, and threats to property values. She used words like vigilance and cooperation and temporary assessments. It was the kind of speech you give when you want people to be afraid and grateful at the same time. I raised my hand. She tried to pretend she didn't see. "Ms. Crane," I said loud enough to turn heads, "who licensed your security contractor to carry a firearm at a neighborhood patrol?" The room did that little collective inhale. Beverly's eyes did the flick you do when you're calculating what lie will sound least like a lie. "He is authorized." "By who?" My wife said from beside me, not yelling, not smiling. "We have agreements," Beverly said. "With whom?" I asked, letting it hang. She rifled her binder like the answer was hiding between plastic sleeves. Before she could manufacture anything, Marcus stood and lifted his phone. "I pulled county records," he said, and you could hear the tremor in his voice, the kind that comes from doing something scary and right. "There is no active HOA. There are no minutes, no elections, no authority. Just Ms. Crane's flyers and her contractor." It was like pulling a brick out of a dam. People started talking over one another. Mrs. Alvarez in the back said, "She charged me $100 for having lavender instead of rosemary." A dad in a baseball cap. "She told me to paint my shed or she'd file a lien." "On what?" A teenager actually held up a chalk-stained hand and said, "She made my little brother scrub the sidewalk because his drawings were graffiti." Beverly tried to raise her hands like Moses parting something. "Everyone, please." The fines were educational. "We need order." "Order isn't extortion," my wife said, and the word echoed in that weird acoustics way gymnasiums amplify vowels. Then she stepped forward and spoke like she does when she's on the stand. Calm, precise, no fat in the language. She laid out the videos, the badge with no number, the way he carried, the law about private security in our state, the absence of any filings to hire or vet a firm. She didn't flash her credentials again because she didn't have to. She had receipts. The room didn't turn on Beverly so much as it stopped believing in her at once. That's worse, in my experience. She went pale in stages. One of her loyalists, Rick, a broad-shouldered guy who had the air of someone who liked being told what to do, took half a step away from her like embarrassment is contagious. We could have ended it there with a community vote and a public shrug. Beverly didn't let that happen. People who are addicted to control don't know how to lose small. She came to our house the next morning. Didn't text, didn't call, just marched up and pushed the door when I opened it like we were in a sitcom, and she was the laugh track. Two of her supporters huffed behind her, sweat already dampening the collars of their polo shirts. "You are spreading lies," she said, and the word lies came out brittle. "You're tearing this neighborhood apart by asking for your paperwork." I said, "You have no right," she said. "I am the elected." "By who?" my wife asked, because it had become a refrain. Beverly's face did a thing, tightened and dropped, like a mask slipping. "I was entrusted," she said. "By who?" my wife repeated. Rick shifted. "Look, he's just trying to help," he shoved in, chin out. Beverly kept this place in line when nobody else would. "There's a difference," my wife said, "between keeping order and keeping people under your thumb." Before Beverly could wind up for another speech, we heard tires on gravel and a car door. A uniformed woman stepped onto our path like peace in black boots. Sergeant Dana Morales from the Maple Hollow PD. We'd met her once, traffic detail, a wave across a median. She nodded at us, then at Beverly. "We've received multiple complaints," she said, calm and all business. "Miss Crane, may I see your binder?" "That's private," Beverly snapped, clutching it like a teddy bear. Sergeant Morales didn't raise her voice or her eyebrows. "If you've been issuing fines or notices, it's not private. You can hand it over, or I can seek a warrant. Your choice." Beverly gaped like she was weighing pride against handcuffs and not enjoying the math. She surrendered the binder. The sergeant flipped through. The deeper she went, the less her face moved. Carbon copy books with no carbon, fines with no codes, fake letterhead, a ledger that looked like a piggy bank had grown up to be a tax evasion scheme. She closed it, and then looked past us down the block to where the dark sedan had just glided into view because the universe loves act breaks. "Is that your contractor?" she asked Beverly. "He provides security," Beverly said, voice shrinking. "Under whose license?" Sergeant Morales said without looking away from the car. The Nauticop stepped out, and you could see the swallow. The sergeant approached him steady as a metronome. Name, she said. He gave one like he was testing it. Agency, she said. He gave none. License number for armed private security, she said. And you could see the calculation in his eyes, the brief strobe of a fight or flight signal. He reached toward his hip like he was going to spin some tale about how he'd left it in his glove box. And my wife said, not loud, don't. It was the voice that stops people from stepping off ledges. He didn't. He put his hands where everyone could see them. Sergeant Morales retrieved a weapon that had no business on that street on that day, secured it, and asked him to turn around. He did, and the cuffs clicked with a finality that felt like thunder rolling away. She read him his rights. It turned out Officer Riker was a guy named Dale who had been bounced from 2 security firms for policy issues, which is HR for a walking liability. It turned out the badge was from a novelty shop. It turned out the gun wasn't licensed to him. It turned out a lot of things we already knew without proof, and now we had proof. Beverly was next, not cuffed then, not yet, but booked later that afternoon after the sergeant and 2 detectives walked out of Beverly's house under the weight of boxes. Papers, binders, a ledger with names and amounts, envelope after envelope. We watched from our porch as neighbors drifted into clusters, faces doing the slow transformation from scared to angry to tired. Mrs. Nguyen from the corner wiped a hand under each eye and told my wife. She took $200 because my fence was too cheerful, as if joy had a legal limit. Marcus came by with his beagle and a look I hadn't seen on him, a kind of lightness around the mouth. They're charging her, he said. Fraud, impersonating authority, harassment. The DA's office is in it. I guess a lot of folks filed complaints this morning. We volunteered our yard for a meeting that evening. Not a showdown, not a victory lap, just a reset. We set up folding chairs under the maple tree and turned the string lights back on and asked people to bring whatever they had. Receipts, screenshots, notes on napkins. My wife did what she does, organizing chaos into a spreadsheet and a system. Folks lined up and dropped their stories into a basket and their shame with them. It turns out shame evaporates quickly when you stand next to someone telling the same story. Rick showed up, head down, hands open. I didn't know, he said, the words catching on something in his throat. I thought she was official. I thought I was helping. My wife nodded once. Bring anything she texted you. We'll include it. It was an absolution. It was a path. A week later, the local news ran a story with drone footage of our pretty block and an anchor voice trying to make sense of suburban tyranny. They aired the shot of Sergeant Morales carrying 6 binders out of Beverly's front door. They mentioned the unlicensed gun, the fake fines, the lack of any legitimate HOA. They said, allegedly, a lot because lawyers exist. But you could hear between the lines. We were done being policed by a binder. We didn't throw a party, but the block did. Not a parade, not a pep rally, just a Saturday where everybody brought a dish and someone's cousin played guitar on a milk crate. Kids chalked the sidewalk like they were reclaiming a painted-over mural. Nobody told them to stop. Marcus grilled hot dogs like a man who had waited 3 summers to be allowed to. A woman I'd never met whose hair was the color of experience pressed a slice of sheet cake into my hand and said, I'm glad you moved here. And I believed she meant it. People kept asking how we did it, like there was a magic sentence. There wasn't. We didn't out-yell anybody. We didn't make heroes or villains out of cardboard. We collected proof. We asked boring questions twice. We didn't let a fake badge or a confident tone stand in for authority. Mostly, we reminded each other we're not alone. Bullies thrive in gaps between people where whispers live. Fill the gaps, and they run out of places to stand. A few days later, Sergeant Morales stopped by wearing a smile that looked allowed to exist now. She's not coming back, she said, matter of fact. No bail. Too many complaints. Too many attempts to intimidate. We thanked her, clumsy words for a big thing. She waved it off. Do us a favor, she said, and make sure the next person with a clipboard has minutes, a vote, and an email address that isn't a free account. Then she grinned. And if you all do create an actual HOA, maybe don't give anyone a binder that big. We laughed, and after she left we stood in the yard and watched the light change the way we wanted to when we signed the mortgage. My wife slid her hand into mine and looked at the tulips she'd planted and said, We're staying. And I realized I'd been waiting for that sentence without knowing it. Because starting over is a series of tiny choices wrapped around a big one, and this was both. Here's the part that sticks with me. The badge showed up because the neighborhood got used to the binder. We all do it, in small ways. Let someone be in charge because they sound sure, because they're loud, because it's easier to nod than to push back. And then one day you wake up, and there's a fine on your mailbox for the color of your welcome mat. There is no cure for that except the slow medicine of standing up, which always feels harder than it is once you're vertical. We didn't just get our block back. We got back a little bit of ourselves we'd been outsourcing to anybody who promised to keep us safe if we didn't ask for receipts. Now, when I sit on the porch in the blue hour and listen to sprinklers and clinking glasses and kids bargaining for 5 more minutes, I think about how close we came to giving all that up for nothing more than a laminated logo and a voice that didn't blink. And I'm grateful to my wife, who knows where to aim questions, to Marcus, who found courage in the shape of a PDF, to Sergeant Morales, who did the patient work of real authority, to a block that remembered how to breathe in public. We'll see what the neighborhood decides next month. There's talk of forming a legitimate homeowners association with term limits and transparent books, and there's talk of never letting any association set foot here again. I'm on the fence, honestly. I've seen communities work beautifully with rules they wrote together and rules they enforced with patience. I've also seen rules become weapons in the hands of the wrong person. That's the conversation we're having under string lights with paper plates. What does order look like without becoming a costume for control? Who gets to hold the keys? And how often do we make them hand the keys back? If you've got a take on that, if you've lived through your own binder and badge saga, or you're in the middle of one and trying to figure out what question to ask first, drop it in the comments. I want to hear if you'd rebuild a real HOA with safeguards or burn the concept to the ground and start over with block parties and a shared spreadsheet. Tell me where you draw the line between keeping a neighborhood tidy and keeping people in line. Who should provide security where you live? Police, a vetted firm, volunteers with training, or nobody with a badge unless the badge has a number on it? If you've been fined for tulips or chalk art or the crime of living like a human being, tell us how you pushed back or how you wish you had. And if there's a Beverly in your life, maybe this is your sign to call a friend, pull the records, and plan a meeting under a tree that belongs to everyone.